Hi, everybody. Okay, I'll take that. Yeah, hi. I am so happy to be here. I love coming out to Monitorama. I'm so happy that Jason has worked this conference, and there's not enough nice things to say about him, and so I'm very appreciative to be out here. But who the heck am I, right? I've actually come to realize that more people don't know me than do, so it's helped my ego out a little bit. But I am James Fryman. I am a security practitioner who got scared over to infrastructure at one point. I really love automation, I love hacking, I love breaking things. And for the better part of my career, I actually was on the offensive side, going and attacking things. And then something happened over a period of about 18 months, and then I was just checking boxes on a PCI compliance list. It's like, I can't do this anymore. So I made a switch. And so I like to consider myself a security practitioner that does infrastructure, as opposed to an infrastructure practitioner who thinks about security. Kind of puts a different spin on things. So today what I do is I'm the infrastructure product owner at Auth0. We are an online identity management solution for you. 10 minutes or less to get your app having a really cool login screen. It's actually really easy, so I'm excited about that. But my mission, since I've actually gone to the defensive side, seems to be to enable operators to sleep. All right, yeah. And for a long time I was actually debating in my career, what is it that I actually do? What is it I care about? What is it that I want to be impactful for? And it seems like that as much as we in this room keep pushing forward the burning and the bleeding edge of the future, the conversations that I have are significantly regressed from this point. Let's call it 7, maybe even 10 years from now, from before. Because in my neck of the woods, Nashville, Tennessee, if you've ever been there, it's a wonderful place. If you ever come there, I will show you a wonderful time. But it's a very old IT town. Large medical footprint. Big enterprises, 10,000 plus people. I think there's like 4 or 5 of these giant enterprises that have so much. And mostly .NET. That's not a judgment on the language or anything, but just in terms of size and having such a love affair with .NET, they really like waterfall. And that really does not gel well with sort of the methodologies that we're trying to push forward here. So it's a little hard to have these conversations. And they usually go like this. Hey, I like instrumentation. Oh, me too, I like instrumentation. Oh, you set it up? Oh, no, yeah, we did, but we got rid of it. You got rid of it, you just pulled it out. Well, how long did you try it? Oh, about 2 days. Oh, okay, what happened? Never a really good excuse. And at first I was irritated by this, because I really don't like it when my friends dodge my questions. I like to interact, exchange with them, try to learn, have them learn from me learn from them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But this is so new to a lot of people in my neck of the woods that I really couldn't blame them. I couldn't blame them for being adversarial about it. So I'm kind of on a mission now. And my mission here is selfish in nature. I'm just going to completely admit that. I want to work at places that do things right. In order for that to happen, I have to have more conversations with people who may not want to have these kinds of conversations. And so when I initially proposed this talk, I was actually kind of in a salty mood. I've had a little rough of a year. And it was really kind of going to be just like all of the negativity that I've actually ever had when talking to people about metrics. Every excuse I've heard from a CTO, a CEO, a director, a manager, some developer, an operator, doesn't matter. But since then, I've actually had a really good success at Auth0. So I started that new job recently, and they had a very interesting experience over the last couple weeks. That I was able to use the methodology that I actually talked about while building the presentation to get some accomplishment. So I'm going to actually, instead of being so negative, I'm going to hopefully turn this into a positive, tell a nice little story about Auth0 and some of the cool things that we're doing, as well as help equip people who want to have conversations with their leaders, why they need metrics, why they need instrumentation. Why are we still having this conversation? It's okay. We've got to keep pushing the bar forward. So the Auth0 story goes something like this. We had a client come up to us recently and said, hey, we really like you guys. We've been playing with you for a long time. We like the solution. We just want to make sure that you can handle the capacity that we're going to send at you. Cool. Well, how much? 3,500 requests per second. Okay, that is a respectable number. Absolutely. So you turn around and you ask the CTO, so what's our max right now? 500. Oh, cool. So how long do we have to get to 3,500 or so, whatever? 2 weeks. Cool. So how on earth do we do this? Apply science. This is an emoji microscope. I wish they were bigger. So, okay, so now you've got this giant challenge in front of you. Can you get it done? I have no idea. Let's give it the good old college try. So how do you do it? First step's recon, right? It's important to understand what has been done up to this point, what people feel about instrumentation. See, I really loathe feelings. I wish I was sort of a robot a little bit so I wouldn't have to deal with them. But most of the conversations that I'm trying to avoid with instrumentations are actually feeling-based conversations. I want to inject data into the conversation so we can actually have data-driven conversations. But in order to get to that point, you still have to interface with the meat bags that you work with and make them feel good, right? This is why instrumentation is important. Where have you succeeded? Where have you failed? And why? Well, what I learned at Auth0 was they tried this once before. They had some issues. They went through. They implemented Librato, signed up, put the agent a couple places. I think maybe they put a stats D endpoint in somewhere. And then it was out with 2 weeks later. And I could never get a clear answer onto why, except for the fact that they're in the hyper-growth stage. When they didn't know if they're going to hang out and be around to have money the next day, something happened. They didn't know if it was causing a problem or not, and so it just came out of fear. Okay, fine. That's interesting. That's going to come into play later, because now you got to understand the aversions that have been created as a result of this. So, when you're talking to people in your organization, try to understand, have they done something before? Have they had successes? Who are the key players involved in those? Because they're going to be your first followers, coming and helping you actually implement this thing inside of your organization. And then you got to make the case. I actually debated putting this slide in here because it's the most cliche slide ever. You have to get buy-in from the top. Well, I actually thought that, if once at some point we would hit this DevOps crossover, if you will. Just think about that for a second, a DevOps crossover. When that happens, well, suddenly we won't have to make cases. Everybody will just be enlightened and will understand and will move on. But even at a company that builds DevOps software, if the CTO's not in on it, it's not going to happen. Doesn't matter if they've got the right marketing label. If your leaders aren't in, it's not going to happen. So when should it happen? That's the big question. When do I do it? So this is a Maslow's hierarchy of needs as applied to DevOps. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing that I found online after attempting to create it once or twice last year. I just waited about 3 or 4 months and then it showed up. So I'm very excited. Thank you, Internet. But on the Internet, we see here that the first thing that we end up talking about in most of these DevOps talks is about the empathy, the culture, the things that actually make us want to drive and change. This is the foundation of which we all build upon. But right underneath that is this thing called understanding. And understanding here says, hey, I want to understand processes, appreciation and consideration for security, logging, and reporting. That's number 2. That's like way before I'm getting into process improvement, automated deployments, repeatable provisioning, CD. And that's an interesting conversation to have with folks, because most of the time everybody's racing and get up here. Because suddenly, if you can just have continuous delivery, everything will be great. But if you don't solve the things underneath it, then you're just going to have a house of cards once you get up here. And that's an important distinction that you can make with your business leaders. Just this morning, I was reading an article, talked about building a feature. So let's say that you had a race car. Well, it's a beautiful race car. And you wanted to make sure you can get faster on the track and beat people or whatever that means. And so you spend hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars on new tires. Months and months and years of research, and you build the tires and you put them on the car. Well, how do you know it's successful? If you don't drive it around and test things. And in this example, they said basically, no. What if you just drove the car off the lot? Would you know if that tire was better or worse than before? Would you know if the millions of dollars that you spent were successful or not? When you talk about a physical asset, and you say, it's weird to not test out whether the tire's good. Yeah, that makes sense. But suddenly talk about software, and that goes out the window. Right? Who cares? YOLO. We got this. We'll fix it in prod. I don't accept that. Right? I think that in order to have good, decent conversations with people, we have to be measuring. Measuring for business, measuring for IT, measuring in general. Right? And if you're talking with a leader that's not quite there on that, that's a good introspection time for yourself. So, when you're having these conversations, what kind of pushback do I get? It's not the most important feature to work on. Yeah, this is tough. It's never the most important feature to work on, except it's the most important feature to work on. Because how do you measure success otherwise? Right, we just talked about this. We can't start until we understand the data retention requirements. This one usually comes from ops folks, incidentally, trying to make sure that, hey, I don't want to implement that until I know exactly what's necessary. They're going to take the giant compliance stick and beat you with it. We have to hold 7 years of data if we start taking it. No, not usually. Why don't you just try something out? It's a premature optimization. Start now and iterate. This is my favorite one, and this doesn't really apply to the Auth0 case, but this has been said to me before. We don't run a SaaS, so all of those fancy DevOps things that you're talking about, they don't apply to us. Why is that? I haven't figured that one out yet, but it's kind of interesting, and I've heard it more than one time. And especially prevalent with software that actually you kind of ship and forget. You let go into the wild, on-prem software. Yeah, that's the most dangerous software. You have no idea when your customer calls whether your stuff is working right or not. And you're going to have he said, she said conversations on the phone about whether the infrastructure is working right or not, or the SAN is working right on their side or not, or the VMware environment, or whatever. Pick the tool. If you don't ship things for you to know how your software is doing, you're not going to win. And this is a fun one. We've made good decisions up to this point. We're going to be fine going forward. We don't need instrumentation. And Dave Farley put out a quote not too long ago that basically said, most developers haven't seen a successful project. So I like to, fight one logical fallacy with another. If this isn't the case, how do you know metrics won't help you if you haven't seen a successful project? Something crazy number like 50-some% of, 17% of projects actually are fatal to companies. Fatal. That's too big of a number. Why wouldn't you try to put some sort of instrumentation in there to try to get some understanding of what's going on? This QR code's a link to that article, by the way, if you're interested in it. And aligning incentives are important. And this one is always interesting because this is where we start to touch and intersect the cultural line versus the technology line or the business line. This is where the DevOps stuff starts coming in. Where you can find alignment between business value and technology value. Well, I put these in here because these are really good, discussions to have with your leader. But at the end of the day, it ultimately boils down to sleep. Again, right? How is it that I can align my incentive to sleep to your incentive to make money? I can tell you with some data and some graphs that'd be really cool. I think that's a good thing to show, right? And you can put fancy words on it around it, like I want to sleep more, decrease the time it takes to respond and restore. I want to sleep more by finding bottlenecks and finishing them before they appear. I want to sleep more by understanding seasonality and planning for the future. Awesome. They want to sleep more because they know that their features are being created. They want to sleep more because they know that their stuff's working well and their users are consuming it. And they want to sleep more because they know their money's being spent well. Sleep, fundamental. Everybody likes it. Align your incentives, right? But I even think it goes beyond that. Most cases these are fuzzy conversations. And unless you're in a position of power, you're doing your best to influence. What really needs to happen though is you just need to put developers on call. Get them on call, have them help out, have them be aware, right? They'll very quickly help you align incentives to put something in there so they cannot get to woken up. And this is kind of key to my talk here, because it actually changed the content of my talk, is being opportunistic. So in the case of Auth0, when I got hired there, they knew they wanted metrics. They'd come, they'd failed, but they knew that they needed these types of things in order to do introspection, to see further, to do cool things. But we had a lot of other things going on. And so when you're making these cases, you're often having to do project plans that take you further and further along into the future. And you have to take small, incremental steps to get there. And that's okay, right? It's okay to have, it's okay to have time taken in order to get things accomplished. But if you're ready for it, if the lightning strikes and you're prepared for it, well, holy cow, when magic things happen, they can. In this case, we sort of had already been working on what does the plan look like to implement metrics at auth0. Let's take a second pass at this. Let's talk with the folks. So we've done a lot of recon up to this point. We've started to do a little bit of implementation and starting to feeling around the edges. And then this customer came up. Well, great, guess what? We have this whole plan in front of us. Let's just accelerate that timeline. It turns out a lot of timing, a lot of things is just planning and then some luck, right? Be opportunistic, find your opportunities within your organization, and strike. There will be a time when you need some data to solve a critical problem, a weird business issue, whatever. If you're the person with the data, oh my goodness, your performance time is going to look pretty good for you. So, next step, pick a tool set. This is what we had to kind of decide for ourselves. And this is where it sort of gets confusing for people, right? And we get common pushbacks here. This is difficult. There are so many moving parts here that certainly there are SaaS vendors that are helping solve that problem through dollars spent. But for the most part, you know, we want to build it inside. We have data retention requirements. Maybe we have data protection requirements. It doesn't matter. These are all the components necessary to build a decent metrics and decent instrumentation pipeline. It's still fuzzy. It's still new. And when you talk to somebody who has had zero exposure to this, and suddenly you say, hey, why don't you just go, you know, all you need is like one of these, do some of this, oh yeah, and then you gotta set up some dashboards too. Nope, they're out, right? And this is where most people just stop, right? And it never gets picked up because of all the features and all the things that I've got time to do and time to make money. Building some instrumentation just isn't going to cut it, right? But I think ultimately you end up getting here, and I'll talk about that here in a second as well. The second option that we could look at is okay, do we outsource at least the management of the servers? There's a lot of unknowns in regards to managing the time series database. Can we at least offload the servers and the management of it? There's still energy that we have to go through in order to implement statsd and all the other collectors or all the other instrumentation points into our code, but at least we can push that upstream. Okay, cool. There's usually time associated with that. You're still going to have to go into your code. You're still going to have to do work, but the OpEx on the back end, you just get to pay dollars for. Right? That may be enough, right? Gives you kind of good balance between build inside and just have somebody else manage the problem. And then the third bit, I think everybody's pretty familiar with, is the nuts and bolts option. Pay lots of money, get things in a dashboard for you for free, at least get some introspection, right? Datadog, New Relic, App Dynamics. I'm sure there's others that fall in this space as well. Well, what we ended up having to do is we went with the Datadog solution. And the reason for that was, you know, in terms of time to get this thing up and running, we didn't have much. And there was enough technical debt that we had learned, having done the recon, learned about where all the dead bodies were buried, that spending the time and energy in order to build it internally probably wasn't an option for us at the point. But the cost associated with going to Datadog was actually far too much for us to kind of comprehend at that point. We did some negotiations, we got the number brought down, but it still is a third of our operation cost for servers. It's ridiculous, right? So, you know, in order to you know, please everybody, we had to make compromises. And one of those compromises was, okay, great, we need this tool now. We need visibility now. However, we're going to build the tool in such a way, and we're going to build the developer touch points that we're going to try to pull it back inside one of these days. Okay? So we're going to provide common interfaces for people. And we're going to have an auth0 instrumentation library that will shim out the thing that ultimately sends metrics to a place. We'll have an auth0 logging library that will ultimately send out things to another place. We'll have an exception handling library. Right? And we'll use tools specifically in interfaces that allow us to pull it internally. So with Datadog, you have dog statsd, statsdogd, something, dog. And so you got a statsd interface there for you. So start using that thing. And then one day we just swap it in and out with one of these wonderful tools that we decide to mix and match. And Sentry also is kind of a good option for that too. I know they've got a SaaS option, and they've also got the on-prem version. I think there's another one or two options within that area as well. But this was kind of our good compromise, okay? I've got 12 months now in order to spend to figure out what's going on, learn some things about our infrastructure, clean a couple things up, move on. And then iterate, right? I think this is the DevOps manifesto, right? Keep going. Don't boil the ocean. Keep trying. Keep pushing. Plan, do, check, act. And this is, I think, also where I've seen some hiccups happen, right? One of the questions that came up, it says, well, you know, talking back to that hierarchy of needs, what happens if I don't have CI or CD? Do I really gain benefit from metrics? I mean, if I've got to spend all this time and energy in this pipeline to push things through, and you know, I'm making all these changes and all these changes and all these changes, and it's so much friction at release, is it really worth my time to do metrics? And so there becomes this kind of chicken and egg scenario. Okay, well, because I don't have CD, I can't have metrics. Because I don't have metrics, I won't have CD, blah, 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 blah. The first hammer, the first feedback is fine not to have CD. Put your instrumentation in, get some visibility, but you better take the data that you learned from it and actually implement it in your next cycle to iterate. Maybe be a little faster, be a little more introspective. Take the data that you got, use it to better yourself. So here's how it looked like for us. We had to take this in phases. Phase 1 was our bootstrap phase. We had to create an environment, programmatically build it, set measurements at key control points, and then start preparing internal testing. From there, we would do iteration. Okay, we've got some sort of standard baseline. We know what's going on. We're going to run this thing to exhaustion. We're going to put some dashboards up. We're going to put all these pretty things. It's going to be so beautiful. And then we're going to keep moving on it until we get to our ultimate level, which was something like 3.5 thousand requests per second. And then you put in some nice things in there for future, and I really want to do system level KPIs, chaos monkey exercises. We're not even here yet. This is still coming. So let's assume that you got the buy-in. Everybody's excited. Now you're going to implement it. There are still things that can go wrong. And I've even heard in several of the talks where they can go wrong, and I'm just going to iterate a couple of them here, right? The developers here, it turns out, okay, so I'm the product owner, and I'm helping enable developers to go see what's going on with their app. I'm not the one actually going in and putting code points. Like I'm helping them do change control requests. The team's helping them figure out where things need to go. But ultimately the developers, the guys who write this application, the fate of this thing is in their hands. Whether they like it or not, whether they consume it or not, whether they digest it and find value in it or not, is going to determine whether you're going to be successful. So you have to really pay attention to feedback. I mean, like super pay attention to feedback. And it's going to be critical because, you know, we're technologists. We like to be blunt and frank. That's okay. Listen. Here's some of the things that you get back. What we have is good enough. Logging is good enough. At auth0, it wasn't good enough. At a lot of places, it's not good enough because usually it requires a couple assumptions. Number one, you have some sort of event that you're aware of to start drilling in and narrowing down. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. You're also assuming that the event that occurred was logged. What if there wasn't a logging event for that? What do you do? So we need some sort of visibility in order to find data points, in order to find timelines, in order to dig further down. So we need more than logging. Logging is complementary to my metrics. This one is huge. No support to interpret data. And we're still having a problem with this at auth0, quite frankly. When we were doing our initial implementation, we did very much condense it into a 2-week time period. So there was a lot going on. Everybody's trying to get instrumentation put into their apps, do some performance testing, move on. And so anything that came out of the box for Datadog was fantastic. We could look at it, we could get some visibility on it, at least see where bottlenecks are occurring. Beyond that, consumption of gauges versus a counter, how to make and build requests per second into my application, finding the right control points was a pain. And we didn't have enough resources to dedicate toward it. We didn't. And as a part, our developers started to lose confidence in the tooling. Well, did they really lose confidence in the tooling? They just felt abandoned. Right? See, when you're doing these things, you have to make sure that you have people on staff that are able to help people out, whether that's documentation, whether that's videos, whether that's hanging out with them and doing pair programming. Have people there that are ready, that have at least been down this road just a little bit further than they have, and can interpret and tell you what to do with these metrics that they're now implementing. Super important. And this is a big one too. Troubleshooting methodology is unknown. This, you know, when I get a little exasperated to this one too. When I got into ops, the first thing that I learned was this thing called the OSI model. And this dude told me if you can do troubleshooting against the OSI model, you'll be fine. And it's gone a long way for me, right? You know, at the very least, you can segment and start to pull in isolation layers, separate things, try to do some debugging. And a lot of people just not had that critical thinking or application applied to how they build things. They're just building features. Something breaks, oh no, the system is too big and too complicated. I don't know. So you gotta help them. And that's okay, right? We're helping, we're all in this together. First step, build out an overview of the system. You know, it was my second month at Auth0 at the time. I had no idea what things looked like. Here, let's speed it up, let's speed it up. So it required us to figure out and actually draw with ugly markers and post-it notes, what does the system actually think we're doing? Even if it's way out wrong, right? You at least understand data flows. Where are they going? Where can bottlenecks appear? Right? They can appear where your networks come in, where handoffs occur to different load balancers applications, where your applications are actually taking that code and doing some processing. And when you pass it around to different microservices, and then ultimately when you call your database. These were all our choke points, right? All the different handoffs that occurred from the point that a user requested something to came to our systems and back. So we had to figure out, okay, great, now we know these points, let's put some instrumentation here. Then you take a baseline. And it doesn't matter, this is also a good point of contention where you can also spend some time bike shedding, right? If you don't have a common test, if you don't have a stick in the mud, if you don't have something that you're using for measurement, you're gonna spend all of this time saying, is my test good? If the test is not valid, when you make a change, how do you know it's good? Well, this is again one of those areas where I say, just decide something. This is 0 now, right? We're gonna call this cardinal point 0. I don't care what happens from this point on, let's make a change and measure from this 0 point. Agree to a standard, start iterating on it, and then as you learn, change it and refine it. But you have to start somewhere. Just pick something and start running with it. And then isolate components. Find bottlenecks, right? Here's a wonderful Datadog dashboard that shows different parts of our application. Our API portion, users, requests from Mongo, server responses. And you know, that looks like a bottleneck right there. There's a pretty nice cliff. What's going on there? Dig in, right? Figure out what's going on. What's happening with I/O? What's happening with CPU? Is that distribution clean, right? Do you have some CPUs running hot or some processes running hot or not? Are things running as you expect them to? And then you gotta go fix, right? This is where ACT, PDCA, ACT, you've now learned things. Go forth and fix. So this is what we found in our 2-week sprint. Well, we found out that MongoDB is MongoDB. And the mmap engine does not preload for you automatically. You can sort of shove documents into RAM if you want to, and maybe it'll re-optimize that later. Okay, right? So we ended up moving to WireTiger, which has this really cool knob that you could turn that says, please make sure there is this much of your data set in RAM, and it'll do its best to try to keep it cached. And from that, we got a 3 times increase. Cool, that's fantastic. So we're up from 500 to 1,500. Awesome. I bring this one up first because there's a propensity always to look at infrastructure as a problem first. And that's okay. Don't fight that, right? Take a look at infrastructure, figure out where you can tweak and tune knobs. And there are a lot of places where you can find benefits. We found a huge one with Keep Alives in one of our services. I'll talk about that in a second. But here it is. I'll talk about it now. And so what we found in one of our microservices, what we call web tasks, this is our serverless infrastructure, so our Lambda as a service, was not doing Keep Alive at all and was spending a lot of time in just rebuilding HTTP cycles. So we did some burn down charts, figured out where it was spending time in code, and we ultimately found out and had CPU running very cleanly. 100% spiked cores, woo! Means I'm using my resources properly. Now we're at 11,000 RPS, just for web task. Now, I say that because this is one of our individual components that we've isolated. So it's now running spectacularly faster than we want it to. But in the whole pipeline, not yet. So we dug some more. And we found out in one of our key authentication pieces, it's kind of like our God method, if you will, does a lot of things, because that was the first one. It did a lot, and so much that it was spending a significant amount of time talking to the database over and over and over again. So the development team actually tried to do a refactor for a bit. Hey, let's try to poke this thing, mess around with it, and after about 2 days, they just declared tire fire, we're done with this. And started again, okay? We now have an understanding of what our customers need, We know what code paths we want them to take and what code paths we want them to avoid. Let's refactor. And after about another 2 days of that, fantastic. Ended up speeding up tremendously. And of course, you find several memory leaks that happen in there. We had this thing fall over and over and over again. And what we would do is we'd pick it back up, we'd throw as much data as we can at it, and we'd figure out where did it fall over and start looking at that. And in two of our services, our main authentication service and our bcrypt as a service, tons of leaks. That's okay, we were able to find them, isolate them, knock them out. And we ended up right at 10,000 RPS. So we totally wiped it out of the water, 2 weeks. And we were able to celebrate with Raptor Jesus. Like, that's a win. I don't care who you are, that's a win. And our customers came and they were excited. We were excited for them. So let's wrap this up here real quick. Measure early, instrument often. Align your incentives. Try to get developers on call if you can, but use words that matter to your boss. I'm going to help share this data that I've got with you and enable you to do better things and find out if your dollars are being spent better so you can rest better, so I can rest better. Jump in, feet first, iterate, go, go, go. Don't delay. The whole point of this is to plan, do, check, act. Try something, experiment, do some science, make a change, keep going. Science, it's awesome. Listen, always listen. Always listen. And if anything, the call to arms to the folks in this room, try to leave things better than you found it, right? These conversations that need to be had with people in our communities, when you go home, like, keep having them. Make sure that the place that you go work next may already be ready for you, and you're not having to solve the same problem again. Unless you really like the bootstrap phase, in which, plenty of work out there for you. So real quick, I want to give a special thanks to the OpZero Performance Tiger team. They did a wonderful job on this. Thank you very much to them. And thank you very much for having me.